The alarm in the control tower was screaming, sharp, breathtaking sound that cut through the afternoon air like a blade. The F-35 Lightning II had suffered catastrophic engine failure during what should have been a routine test flight, and the pilot was now attempting an emergency landing with no second chances. Everyone in Hangar 7 was frozen, looking up at the overcast sky. Radio traffic was chaotic, voices overlapping in controlled panic. Pilot Major Collins' voice echoed through the headsets, mixed with the sound of alarms, sweat, and barely contained fear. "Tower, Mayday, Mayday. Complete engine failure. Total power loss. Attempting emergency landing. Field in sight, but losing altitude fast." Hangar personnel watched helplessly from the tarmac. This was supposed to be just another test flight. Routine systems check. Everything had been perfectly planned, meticulously calculated, triple-checked by the best engineers on the base. But now nothing was going according to plan, and a $30 million aircraft was falling from the sky with a human being trapped inside. Engineers frantically checked screens displaying telemetry data that made no sense. Technicians dropped their tools and looked up, shielding their eyes against the glare. Ground crew members were running around, clearing equipment, preparing for the worst. Emergency vehicles were already racing toward the runway, their sirens adding to the cacophony of crisis. And in the corner of the hangar, near the maintenance bay, where the backup F-35 sat with its engine compartment open, there was a woman working quietly, methodically, as if the world wasn't falling apart around her. Sarah Martinez. She had been working at Edwards Air Force Base for exactly 6 months and 4 days. Quiet, reliable, invisible to most. Nobody looked at her twice. Just another technician in olive green coveralls, someone who maintained the F-35 Lightning II fighters, performed routine engine checks, handled the 1,000 small tasks that kept the most advanced fighter jets in the world flying. Her work was precise, professional, and completely unremarkable. She arrived early at 0600 hours every morning, left late after 1800 hours, and never caused problems or drew attention to herself. Her colleagues knew almost nothing about her personal life. She ate lunch alone, usually a simple sandwich from the base commissary. She lived in a small apartment off base, drove a 10-year-old Honda Civic, and seemed to have no friends or family. During coffee breaks, while other technicians talked about their families, their weekend plans, their military service, Sarah would simply listen politely and contribute nothing about herself. Her background check had been standard, but thorough. Former civilian aircraft mechanic, graduated from technical school with honors, excellent references from previous employers in the private sector. Clean record. No military service, no special clearances. Just someone who understood engines and electronics and wanted steady work on a military base. The paperwork showed a woman who had worked her way up through various civilian aviation companies, maintaining everything from small Cessnas to commercial airliners. Nobody knew that every single detail of that background was a carefully constructed lie, created by someone who understood how military security investigations worked, because she had once been on the other side of them. Nobody knew that the woman they called Sarah Martinez had once held a top-secret clearance with special access programs. Nobody knew that she had flown classified test flights that pushed the boundaries of what was possible with modern aircraft. Nobody knew that her real name appeared on commendation letters signed by generals, and that her techniques were still being taught at the test pilot school just a few miles away. Most importantly, nobody knew that 3 years ago, Major Sarah Phoenix Martinez had been the youngest female pilot ever selected for the Air Force's most classified test program, flying prototype aircraft that officially didn't exist and conducting missions that would never appear in any public record. But now, hearing the alarm screaming above them, hearing pilot Collins fighting for his life in a crippled aircraft 4,000 feet above the desert, Sarah slowly put down her tools on the metal workbench. Her hands were steady. Too steady for someone watching a disaster unfold. She stood up, brushed metal shavings from her coveralls, and began walking toward the control tower. Her steps were determined, but not rushed. Calm. Purposeful. As if she had experienced this exact situation before. As if she knew exactly what needed to be done. The other technicians barely noticed her leaving. They were too focused on the drama playing out above their heads, too caught up in the helpless feeling of watching someone else's crisis from the ground. "Hey!" Security guard Sergeant Davis spotted her approaching the restricted area. "This area is off-limits to unauthorized personnel. Go back to your station." Sarah didn't stop walking. "I can help them," she said quietly, her voice cutting through the noise with unexpected authority. "You're just a technician. This is a pilot emergency. The control tower has everything under control." Sarah looked at him directly for the first time since she'd been working at the base. There was something in her eyes that Sergeant Davis had never seen before in any civilian contractor. Composure under pressure, hard-earned experience, the kind of authority that didn't come from rank or title, but from having been tested in situations where failure meant death. "Sergeant Davis," she said, using his name though he'd never told it to her. "If you don't let me through right now, that pilot is going to die, and you're going to have to live with knowing you could have prevented it." The change in her tone stopped Davis cold. This wasn't the voice of the quiet technician woman he had known for 6 months. This was the voice of someone accustomed to giving orders in life-or-death situations, someone who had done this before. Davis stepped aside without another word. Sarah entered the control tower, taking the stairs 2 at a time. The chaos inside was organized, but desperate. Air Traffic Controller Staff Sergeant Rodriguez was struggling with multiple radio frequencies, sweat beading on his forehead. Colonel Peterson was bent over tactical displays, calculating glide ratios and emergency landing scenarios. Operations Chief Carter was coordinating with emergency services, his voice tight with stress. "Clear the runway!" Staff Sergeant Rodriguez was shouting into his headset. "All traffic diverted. Emergency pattern established." "Is the crash fire rescue team in position?" Colonel Peterson asked, not looking up from his charts. "Crash fire rescue and medical are standing by," Carter replied, checking his monitor. "But sir, if the engine is completely dead and he's lost hydraulic pressure, then it becomes a $30 million glider," Peterson completed grimly. "And gliders land very fast and very hard." Collins' voice crackled over the radio again, strained but professional. "Tower, I'm losing altitude fast. Controls are sluggish. Hydraulic pressure dropping. Request emergency landing clearance." "Cleared for emergency landing, runway 09, Rodriguez responded immediately. "Wind calm, emergency services standing by." Sarah quietly approached Rodriguez's station. "Excuse me, could you give me the microphone?" Staff Sergeant Rodriguez looked at her in confusion, noticing her for the first time. "Who are you? How did you get in here? This is a restricted area. I need to talk to the pilot." "You're just a technician. Get out of here before I call security." But Colonel Peterson turned his head. He had caught something in Sarah's voice, something that made him look more carefully. He saw the expression on her face. Not the panic he expected from a civilian contractor, but determination, confidence, the look of someone who belonged in a crisis situation. "Wait," Peterson said, studying Sarah's face. "Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, give her the microphone." "Sir?" "That's an order, Staff Sergeant." Staff Sergeant Rodriguez hesitated for only a moment. The colonel's authority was absolute, even in situations that made no sense. He handed the microphone to Sarah with obvious reluctance. Sarah took the device with hands that didn't shake. She adjusted the frequency with the practiced ease of someone who had used military communication equipment before. She took a deep breath, centered herself, and spoke with a voice that carried calm authority. Lightning 07, this is Tower. I need you to listen very carefully to my voice and follow my instructions exactly. Colin's voice came back immediately, desperate but still professional. Tower, who is this? Where's Rodriguez? I don't recognize your voice. My name is Sarah. I'm going to talk you through this emergency landing. First, I need you to tell me your current altitude and airspeed. 4,000 feet and dropping fast. Airspeed 180 knots. Engines completely dead. Hydraulic pressure failing. This bird's becoming a brick. Sarah closed her eyes for just a moment. In her mind, she perfectly visualized the F-35 Lightning II's cockpit. Not from studying manuals or watching training videos, but from muscle memory earned through hundreds of hours in that exact seat. Every button, every control, every system, every backup system. The engine restart procedures, the hydraulic failure protocols, the emergency landing checklists. She knew them all by heart, not from reading technical orders, but from having lived them in situations where failure meant death. The memories came flooding back unbidden. Her first flight in an F-35, 2 years into the test program, when she was still Major Martinez and not yet Phoenix. The way the aircraft felt alive beneath her hands, responsive and powerful, like flying a machine designed by people who understood that pilots and aircraft were partners, not just operator and equipment. She remembered the moment she first broke the sound barrier in the Lightning II, the smooth transition through Mach 1 that felt nothing like the jarring experience in older fighters. She remembered her final flight in an F-35 just weeks before the mission that destroyed her life. A routine test of new software that ended up being anything but routine when a programming error caused a complete electrical failure at 30,000 feet. She had brought that aircraft home on backup systems and pure instinct, earning the respectful silence that was the highest compliment test pilots gave each other. Most of all, she remembered the confidence that came from knowing your aircraft so completely that you could fly it with your eyes closed. The F-35 had quirks and characteristics that took time to learn, but once you understood its personality, it would do anything you asked of it. Because she wasn't just a technician. She never had been. Collins, I need you to check the emergency power unit status. Right side panel, below the engine display console. A brief silence while Collins located the correct switch. Then, emergency power unit shows running, but I'm not getting full electrical power. Good. Now try the backup electrical system. Left console, blue switch marked Backup Bus. Trying backup bus now. I've got partial electrical restoration. How did you know that? Sarah ignored the question. Now switch to backup flight control mode. You should have a switch marked FLT control with positions for primary and backup. Switching to backup flight control. Okay, I've got better stick response now. Who are you? How do you know these procedures? Colonel Peterson was staring at Sarah intently. The level of technical knowledge she was displaying wasn't something a civilian technician would possess. These were procedures that required extensive training on the F-35 platform. Sarah continued without answering Collins' question. Collins, listen carefully. Your aircraft is now operating on degraded flight control laws. That means reduced flight envelope protection. You need to be more precise with your control inputs and apply more stick pressure than normal. Copy that. Altitude now 3,000 feet. Controls are responding better. Everyone in the control tower was watching Sarah now. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez with amazement. Peterson with growing suspicion. Carter with the desperate hope that this mysterious woman actually knew what she was talking about. Sarah opened the microphone again. Maintain current airspeed. F-35, without full power, has a higher stall speed than normal. You need to keep your approach speed at minimum 180 knots all the way to touchdown. 180? That's fast for landing. Trust me, Collins. If you come in slower, you'll stall. And stall recovery from low altitude in a degraded aircraft is not possible, Collins completed, understanding the physics. Okay, maintaining 180. Exactly. Now configure for landing. Flaps to takeoff position, not full landing. Landing gear down and locked. Flaps takeoff, gear coming down, gear shows down and locked. But Sarah, whoever you are, I'm showing no brake pressure. Anti-skid system is offline. Sarah's jaw tightened. This was the critical problem. No brakes meant the F-35 would have tremendous momentum after touchdown, likely running off the end of the runway into the hangars or perimeter fence. Peterson stepped closer to Sarah. "How are you going to solve the brake problem?" he asked quietly. Sarah looked at him for the first time. Aerodynamic braking and speed brake deployment. The F-35 has excellent speed brakes for high-drag situations. You seem to know a lot about F-35 capabilities for a civilian technician. Colonel, with respect, now is not the time for that conversation. Sarah keyed the microphone. Collins, after touchdown, you're going to need to use aerodynamic braking. Immediately deploy speed brakes to full extension, then maintain a nose-high attitude to maximize drag. Speed brakes after landing, nose-high. Got it. But what if that's not enough? If you're still carrying too much speed, we'll use emergency steering with any remaining hydraulic pressure to keep you on the runway center line. Collins's voice was tighter now. Altitude 2,000 feet. I can see the runway. Perfect. Begin your approach now. Shallow glide path, steady airspeed, no sudden control movements. Beginning final approach. As Collins began his desperate attempt to land the crippled fighter, Sarah found herself remembering another emergency landing. Different aircraft, different circumstances, but the same life or death pressure. It had been 3 years ago, over hostile territory, when everything went wrong and she had to bring a damaged aircraft home with no hydraulics, no radio, and enemy fighters trying to shoot her down. That was before the classified mission that destroyed her life, before she became officially dead, before she had to disappear and become Sarah Martinez, civilian technician, hiding in plain sight on the very base where she had once been one of the most respected test pilots in the Air Force. Altitude 1,000 feet, Collins reported. You're doing great, Collins. Maintain current approach. Tower, I have to ask. Your voice sounds familiar. Have we met before? Sarah's heart skipped. She had been Collins' instructor at the test pilot school at Edwards, before her world collapsed. Before the mission in Turkmenistan that went sideways. Before she discovered that someone in her own unit had betrayed them, leading to the deaths of 4 good people and forcing her to fake her own death to survive. Focus on your landing, Collins. 500 feet. Roger. 500 feet. Runway in sight. Colonel Peterson was studying Sarah's profile, trying to place where he might have seen her before. There was something familiar about her bearing, her confidence, the way she naturally took command of the situation. 300 feet, looking good. Excellent, Collins. Prepare for touchdown. Remember, speed brakes immediately, then nose high. 200 feet. Sarah held her breath. This was always the critical moment, when physics and skill met the unforgiving earth. 100 feet. Here we go. The F-35 Lightning II hit the runway hard, much harder than a normal landing, but the landing gear held. The aircraft bounced once, settled, and began its high-speed roll down the concrete. Touchdown! Collins's voice carried relief and triumph. "Rolling out!" "Speed brakes now," Sarah commanded. Collins activated the speed brake system. Large panels extended from the aircraft's fuselage and wings, immediately creating massive aerodynamic drag. The F-35 began to decelerate significantly. "Now nose high for maximum drag." Collins pulled back on the stick. The F-35's nose came up, creating additional drag from the increased angle of attack. The combination of speed brakes and nose-high attitude was working, but the aircraft was still carrying substantial momentum. "Emergency steering available?" "I've got some rudder authority, keeping it on center line." The F-35 continued down the runway, slowing but still moving fast. It passed the halfway point, then the three-quarter mark. Emergency vehicles were racing alongside, ready to respond if the aircraft left the runway. "Come on," Sarah whispered, unconsciously gripping the edge of the console. The aircraft finally came to a stop just 800 feet from the end of the runway. Close, but safe. Silence fell over the control tower. Then everyone began breathing again. Collins's voice came over the radio, shaky with relief. "Tower, Lightning 07 safely on the ground. Aircraft secured. And whoever Sarah is, thank you. You saved my life." Sarah handed the microphone back to Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, her hands finally showing a slight tremor from the adrenaline. She had just guided an emergency landing as if she had been doing it her entire career. Colonel Peterson stepped directly in front of her. "I need to know who you are, right now." Sarah looked at him calmly. "I'm Sarah Martinez, hangar technician. You have my employment records." "Employment records can be fabricated. I want to know how a civilian contractor knows emergency procedures for the F-35 that most of my pilots don't know." Before Sarah could answer, the control tower door burst open. Collins ran in, still wearing his flight suit, helmet under his arm, his face flushed with the afterglow of cheating death. He looked around the room until his eyes found Sarah. "You," he said, walking directly toward her. "You saved my life. I don't know who you are, but I need to thank you properly." Collins extended his hand for a handshake. Sarah took it, and immediately Collins noticed something. Her grip was firm, confident, and calloused in very specific places. The calluses that came from thousands of hours gripping a fighter aircraft's stick and throttle. "Wait a minute," Collins said, studying her face more carefully. "Your voice on the radio. It sounded familiar." Sarah tried to withdraw her hand, but Collins held on, his eyes widening with recognition. "Oh my God," he whispered. "I know that voice. I know those hands." Everyone in the control tower was watching now. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, Peterson, Carter, and several other personnel who had been drawn by the drama. Collins' face went completely white. "You're not a technician." "Collins, you're Major Sarah Phoenix Martinez." The name hit the control tower like a physical blow. Everyone froze, the normal sounds of radio chatter and equipment operation suddenly seeming impossibly loud in the silence that followed. Phoenix. The call sign was legendary at Edwards Air Force Base and throughout the test pilot community. Major Sarah Phoenix Martinez had been one of the most gifted test pilots in Air Force history, a woman who had redefined what was possible in experimental aircraft. She had flown first flights on classified aircraft that most people didn't even know existed, had pushed the envelope on every advanced fighter platform, and had earned a reputation for bringing damaged aircraft home when no one else could. Phoenix was the pilot who had first taken the F-35 beyond its published performance limits, discovering capabilities that the manufacturer didn't know their own aircraft possessed. She was the instructor who had trained dozens of the best pilots in the service, including many who now served as squadron commanders and test pilots themselves. She was the aviator, Other pilots talked about in hushed, respectful tones. The one who had made the impossible look routine and had never met a flying challenge she couldn't master. Her techniques were still being taught at the test pilot school. Her emergency procedures had been incorporated into official flight manuals. Her name appeared on classified reports that documented breakthrough achievements in military aviation. She had been, quite simply, one of the best pilots the Air Force had ever produced. But Phoenix had disappeared 3 years ago during a classified mission over hostile territory. Officially listed as missing in action, presumed dead after her aircraft was shot down during a black operations mission that couldn't be acknowledged publicly. Her memorial service had been attended by generals and test pilots from around the world, a gathering of the aviation elite paying respects to one of their own. The loss of Phoenix had been felt throughout the test pilot community, like the death of a family member. Young pilots had lost a role model, experienced aviators had lost a colleague who pushed them to be better, and the Air Force had lost a resource that couldn't be replaced. And now Phoenix was standing in their control tower, wearing olive green coveralls and claiming to be a civilian technician named Sarah Martinez. Colonel Peterson's mouth fell open. "Major Sarah Martinez? But you're dead. You were declared KIA 3 years ago." Sarah shook her head slowly. "I was declared missing in action. There's a difference." Staff Sergeant Rodriguez was staring in disbelief. "But the memorial service, the official reports, were necessary for my survival." Collins was still in shock. "Phoenix, you were my instructor at test pilot school. You taught me everything I know about emergency procedures. That's why your voice sounded familiar." "I remember you, Collins. You were one of my better students. I'm glad you remembered the lessons." Colonel Peterson had recovered from his initial shock and was now thinking like a commanding officer. "Major Martinez, if you're alive, there are serious questions that need answering, starting with why you've been hiding on my base under false identity." "Colonel, it's a long story, and not one I can tell in an open control tower." "Then we'll continue this conversation in a secure location." At that moment, the control tower door opened again. Base Commander Colonel Harrison entered, accompanied by 2 military police officers. He had obviously been monitoring the radio traffic and had come to investigate the unusual emergency landing procedures. Harrison looked around the room, taking in the tense atmosphere. His eyes settled on Sarah. "I understand we have an unidentified individual who provided expert assistance during the emergency landing," he said formally. Colonel Peterson stepped forward. "Sir, this is Major Sarah Martinez. Call sign Phoenix." Harrison's expression changed dramatically. "That's impossible. Major Martinez was killed in action 3 years ago." "No, sir," Sarah said quietly. "I was never killed. I was betrayed." The room fell silent. Harrison studied Sarah's face carefully, and slowly recognition dawned. "Jesus Christ," he whispered. "It really is you." Sarah nodded. "Hello, Colonel Harrison. It's been a while." Harrison had been a lieutenant colonel 3 years ago, serving as deputy commander of the test wing when Phoenix was their star pilot. He knew her face, her voice, her reputation. "But the mission reports, the classified investigation, you were listed as KIA." "Because someone in my unit betrayed us," Sarah said, her voice hardening as she spoke words she had never said aloud before. "Someone sold out our mission to eliminate an asset we were extracting from a black site near the Turkmenistan border. 4 good people died because of that betrayal, and I only survived because I didn't follow standard exfiltration protocol." The control tower fell into complete silence. Even the background hum of electronic equipment seemed to fade as everyone processed what they had just heard. Sarah continued, her voice steady but carrying the weight of 3 years of hidden pain. The mission was supposed to be routine extraction. We were pulling out a CIA asset who had been gathering intelligence on weapons trafficking networks. Simple in-and-out operation, 48 hours maximum exposure time. But someone with access to our operational planning had sold us out to the very people we were trying to avoid. Collins was staring at her, remembering fragments of rumors and classified briefings from 3 years ago. The Turkmenistan incident. That was you? That was us. 5-person team, 2 pilots, 3 ground operatives. We went in clean and quiet, extracted the asset on schedule, and were heading to the exfiltration point when everything went wrong. The enemy was waiting for us. They knew our route, our timing, our emergency protocols. They had surface-to-air missiles positioned along our flight path and ground forces at every backup landing zone. Harrison was leaning forward, his face grave. What happened to your team? Sarah's composure wavered for just a moment. Captain Rodriguez and Staff Sergeant Chen were shot down in the lead aircraft. They never had a chance. Lieutenant Morrison and Sergeant Williams were captured at the primary exfiltration point and executed before we could mount a rescue operation. The CIA asset. He died in my aircraft during the firefight. The room was completely still. These weren't just operational statistics to the people listening. These were names, faces, fellow service members who had died because someone had betrayed them. I only survived because my aircraft took heavy damage and I had to divert to an unplanned landing site. By the time I could establish communication with friendly forces, the official reports were already being written. Missing in action, presumed dead. And I realized that if I surfaced, whoever had betrayed us would finish the job. Harrison looked stunned. Why didn't you report back? Why let everyone think you were dead? Because the person who betrayed us was someone with high clearance and access to operational planning. Someone who knew our routes, our timing, our extraction points. If I had reported back through normal channels, I would have been killed before I could identify the traitor. Collins stepped forward. So, you've been hiding for 3 years? Surviving for 3 years. Moving from place to place, working different jobs, staying invisible. I finally came here because... Sarah paused, her voice softening. Because this is where I learned to fly, where I became Phoenix. I wanted to be close to the aircraft, even if I couldn't fly them anymore. Colonel Peterson was trying to process everything. So you took the job as a technician to stay close to the F-35 program? I took the job because it was the closest I could get to the sky without revealing myself. Working on the aircraft, understanding their systems, watching the test flights. It was the only way I could still be part of the world I loved. Harrison was shaking his head slowly. Phoenix, do you have any idea what your disappearance did to the program? The investigations, the security reviews, the classified projects that were shut down? I know, and I'm sorry, but I was more valuable alive and hidden than dead and buried. Can you prove what you're saying about the betrayal? Sarah reached into her coveralls and pulled out a small device. I've been gathering evidence for 3 years. Digital breadcrumbs, financial records, communication intercepts. I know who sold us out. Harrison's eyes widened. Who? Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Webb. He was our mission commander. He had gambling debts, and foreign intelligence services offered him more money than he could refuse. The name meant nothing to Collins or Rodriguez, but Harrison and Peterson both recognized it. Webb had been promoted to full colonel since Phoenix's disappearance and was now serving in a sensitive position at the Pentagon. That's a serious accusation, Harrison said carefully. It's a serious crime, Sarah replied. And I have proof. Harrison looked at the military police officers, then back at Sarah. Major Martinez, I'm going to have to place you in protective custody while we sort this out. I understand. Collins stepped forward. Sir, With respect, this woman just saved my life and a $30 million aircraft. Whatever happened 3 years ago, she proved today that she's still one of us. I appreciate that, Major Collins, but there are protocols that must be followed. Sarah looked directly at Harrison. Colonel, I have one request. Before you lock me up, let me submit my evidence about Webb. If something happens to me, I want to make sure that information gets to the right people. Harrison nodded slowly. Agreed. We'll debrief you fully before any detention. The military police officers stepped forward, but they didn't handcuff Sarah. They simply positioned themselves to escort her. As they prepared to leave, Collins called out, "Phoenix!" Sarah turned back to him. "Thank you again. And it's good to have you back." Sarah smiled for the first time since her identity had been revealed. "It's good to be back, Collins, even if it's temporary." Colonel Peterson spoke up. "Major Martinez, for what it's worth, what you did today. Bringing that aircraft down safely with no brakes, no hydraulics, using speed brakes and aerodynamic techniques, it was textbook perfect. You haven't lost your edge." "You never really leave the cockpit," Sarah replied. "It stays with you, even when you're pretending to be someone else." As the group prepared to leave the control tower, Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, who had been silent during most of the revelations, finally spoke up. "Major Martinez, Phoenix, I just want to say that watching you work today was incredible. You took control of an impossible situation and made it look routine." Sarah nodded at him. "That's what we're trained for, Staff Sergeant, to make the impossible look routine." Harrison opened the door, and the group began filing out. But as they reached the stairs, Sarah paused and looked back at the control tower one more time. This room had been her second home during her years as a test pilot. She had coordinated hundreds of flights from here, had guided other pilots through emergencies, had been part of the team that pushed the boundaries of aviation technology. For 6 months, she had worked just a few hundred yards away, maintaining the aircraft she once flew with unmatched skill, listening to radio chatter from flights she should have been commanding, watching other pilots test systems she had helped develop. Now, finally, she had been able to do what she was truly meant to do. Guide a pilot home. Save a life. Prove that some skills never fade, no matter how long you try to bury them. "Phoenix," Harrison said gently. "It's time to go." Sarah nodded and followed the group down the stairs. As they walked across the tarmac toward the administration building, she could see Collins' F-35 Lightning II sitting on the runway, surrounded by emergency vehicles and ground crew. Steam was rising from the still hot engine, and technicians were already beginning their post-incident inspection. The aircraft would fly again. After repairs, modifications, and extensive testing, it would return to the sky stronger than before. Just like Phoenix herself. For 3 years, she had been grounded, hiding, pretending to be someone she wasn't. But today had proven that you can't keep a true pilot away from the sky forever. Eventually, the sky calls you back. As they entered the administration building, Sarah could hear radio chatter from the control tower behind them. Normal operations were resuming with the efficient professionalism that defined Edwards Air Force Base. Other flights were being cleared for landing, test schedules were being adjusted, and the crisis was officially over. But everyone who had been in that control tower today would remember this afternoon for the rest of their lives. They would remember the moment when a mysterious civilian technician revealed knowledge that saved a pilot's life and a multi-million-dollar aircraft. They would remember the shock of discovering that a legend they thought was dead had been working among them for months. Most of all, they would remember the revelation that Major Sarah Phoenix Martinez had not died in combat 3 years ago, but had instead been forced into hiding by betrayal and murder. For Sarah, walking across the familiar concrete of Edwards Air Force Base felt like returning home after a long and difficult journey. She had learned to fly here as a young officer, had earned her test pilot wings here, had pushed the boundaries of aviation technology here, and had become the pilot known as Phoenix here. For 6 months, she had worked just a few hundred yards from the runways where she had once commanded some of the most advanced aircraft in the world. Every morning when she arrived for work, she had watched F-35s taking off for test flights she should have been leading. Every afternoon when she left, she had listened to radio chatter from missions she should have been conducting. Every day, she had maintained aircraft she once flew with unmatched skill, knowing that she could never again climb into a cockpit without revealing her identity. But today had changed everything. Today, she had been forced to choose between maintaining her cover and saving Collins's life. The choice had been easy, even though it meant the end of her hidden existence. Some things were more important than personal survival, and one of those things was the life of a fellow pilot. Now, finally, she might have the chance to seek justice for her murdered teammates and stop Colonel Webb from endangering other military personnel. The evidence she had gathered over 3 years would finally see daylight, and the families of Captain Rodriguez, Staff Sergeant Chen, Lieutenant Morrison, and Sergeant Williams might finally learn the truth about how their loved ones had died. "Phoenix," Harrison said gently as they reached the entrance to the administrative building. "Before we go inside, I want you to know that what you did today, bringing Collins down safely, revealing yourself to save his life, that took courage that goes beyond duty." Sarah nodded, her voice quiet but steady. "That's what we do, Colonel. We bring each other home.